Hello, and a warm welcome to today's episode, where we are going to take a deep journey into the creative portal. And we're going to do this to be exploring the intersection and the interplay between sacred geometry, art therapy, psychedelics, and divine intelligence. And today I have the honor and privilege of having Charmaine Husum here with me today. Welcome, Charmaine.
Hi, Gaia. Thank you. It's so nice to be back with you again today and exploring these pieces.
You are absolutely welcome. Charmaine, now for those who haven't watched the other videos, you are an art therapist, a counselor, and an artist. And I'd love to jump right in with your permission and find out, how did your journey into sacred geometry start?
Had a dream, and when I woke up from the dream, there was something that said, remember this. I couldn't remember at all what the dream was about. And I happened to I ended up going to a presentation that was at the planetarium on sacred geometry. Someone told me about it, so I thought, yeah, it sounds interesting. I'm interested in everything from the planetarium, and sacred geometry is something that's interesting to me too. So I went to this presentation, and as I was sitting in the auditorium waiting for the speaker to talk, something inside me reminded me of that dream. And the dream was, it was a deja vu of me being in that auditorium. So something felt really profound and important about this presentation and watching it. The presentation was a man who had been creating sacred geometry and recognized that all of his images were actually the same as images that were seen in crop circle formations. So that's what really started me on the path. And then as an artist, I started creating my own sacred geometry art and just noticed what was happening inside my body as I did that.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Could you tell us a little bit about what sacred geometry actually is, and what divine intelligence, how divine intelligence plays a role in it, and how those two things influence your art?
Yes, absolutely. So it's interesting when, we speak about sacred geometry, the question can be like, well, what makes it so sacred? And what makes sacred geometry sacred is that there is a divine intelligence within everything in nature, within our own bodies, in our DNA. We are geometric beings. And the intelligence within nature promotes life. So if you look at the way that, say, leaves of a plant are situated, they grow in a way that the water will reach the roots in the most efficient and intelligent way. They move towards the sun when the sun comes out. There is an intelligence to nature that is divine, that is amazing, right? And the same way our bodies work, the systems within our bodies work, the way our cells work, the way our DNA is structured. We are geometric beings, and when we begin focusing on sacred geometry and paying attention to it, it can really help support healing in the brain, rerouting our neural pathways, and also a connection to spirit and a connection to all that is around us. So, and the second part of your question, how has my art been influenced by sacred geometry? I would say when I first began creating the flower of life, I noticed something happening in my body, in my psyche, in my brain that promoted wellness, that made me feel good inside. And it was almost as if there were things shifting within me that were pointing me in the direction of optimal wellness. And so I often invite people to try making the flower of life, see what happens for you. So it's interesting when we start looking at, and specifically the flower of life, which you see behind me in both of these images, or aspects of it. when we look at the flower of life, it is said that all geometrical equations in our world are contained within that flower of life. When you expand the flower of life out to be Metatron's cube, which is called Metatron's cube, what we have is all 5 platonic solids within this image, as well as every geometrical equation that's known to humans. It's also really quite fascinating when you look at what Da Vinci was studying, that the flower of life was something very important to him. And you see this in his manuals, in his sketchbooks, and this kind of sacred, kind of mystical almost, but also quite grounded information in the structure of our bodies, right? So when we look at, say, the length of our forearm, how that is the same as our foot size, and different ratios within the body. There is an intelligence that is far beyond coincidence.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the Fibonacci sequence and the spiral are also elements that play into this sacred geometry, right?
Absolutely, yes. There's many different types of sacred geometry, or different images that are sacred, and ultimately what they're doing is creating optimal life to happen, right? With the Fibonacci sequence, right? We see that in different plant formations, in the nautilus shell, when we speak of the toroidal field, for instance, right? That is a toroid, so that it's energy moving up and around as if in a donut. That is the magnetic field that supports and heals our planet. Actually, I have a image of one here that I could show you, just so you know what I'm talking about. This is one of my pieces of the toroidal field. And so as you see, right, it's a donut shape. And what many believe too is this image is also the energy center around our entire body, so our aura. So there's a divine intelligence that's happening where energy is coming in on itself and rejuvenating.
That was going to be my next question, is how do you incorporate some of these elements into your own artwork? And do you have a couple of examples that you could show us how you use these examples and these principles in your own artwork?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I have a couple behind me here. I'm a big fan of angels, so I often like incorporating angels into my work. With many of my pieces, though, and I have a couple here. I have the toroidal field. These are just, most of my pieces are quite large. So these are Giclée archival prints done on canvas that I have. So with each of these, actually, I'm going to bring this one out. This is one of my favorites. I call this the healing matrix. And so with each of my pieces, what I do is first I create the flower of life. And I often use that as a grid for the entire piece. So as you see with this piece over here, I've just gridded out the flower of life on the background. And then I begin creating an image through that. So it's so fascinating when you have the flower of life as a grid, what types of shapes fit into that, right? Like the yin yang fits into that perfectly. And once you expand it, we can create Metatron's cube. We can create all these different images. And so what I do when I'm creating, and the way it supports me and affects me, is I first start with a nice, supportive, relaxing meditation. I don't believe that I'm actually creating these, but more that I am creating, or a portal's kind of been created, where I'm just a tool that the universe is flowing through. And so I really trust the process. And this comes from my training as an art therapist as well, trusting that process, that every mark has meaning and that healing is coming through the artwork, through me into the artwork, not only for me, but for anyone else who's looking at the artwork as well. So yeah, this is actually one of my favorite pieces called the Healing Matrix. And as you see, I start with the flower of life. Here I expanded out into Metatron's cube, but then I just kind of did my own thing too, right? I just let spirit kind of move me. What's really fascinating for me is how it makes me feel. It's like I can feel the neurons in my brain shifting and moving and recalibrating, reorganizing in the same way that I see in nature.
Charmaine, taking one step back and going back to divine intelligence and spirit sort of guiding the whole process of creativity, I'd love it if you could talk to us a little bit about the intersection between, it's a fascinating intersection to me because I've studied art. I'm very interested in psychedelics, and I've had my own experiences with divine intelligence, which I think is always a profound experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the convergence of creativity, divine intelligence, and psychedelics, and sometimes using psychedelics to open up those portals of creativity.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is, I know my own experience and the experience of others I've spoken to, and you probably have all heard this, right, and seen Alex Gray's work. There tends to be these visuals people get when they're using psychedelics that are of sacred geometry. So what is that all about? I don't know. And it's not just using psychedelics. It can be in different altered states of consciousness. I actually recently did a meditation where someone offered a light language, and I was seeing images, sacred geometry images, just around, right, when I closed my eyes and did my own meditation. So yeah, what is that intersection? And I think that's the unknown, and that's what's so exciting, is there's something beyond the veil. We don't know exactly what it is, right? But we know it's something, and we know it makes us feel organized and calm and excited at the same time, and just feeling good, feeling connected to all there is. And I, as I work with psychedelic integration. I have an online course for that. I work with individuals online and in person to help integrate the effects of psychedelics. And what's really fascinating is something, it feels almost, I'm hearing it from most people, actually. I can't even think of anyone I haven't heard it from, but people who have used psychedelics for healing purposes, that are maybe atheist and don't believe in anything. And then they come back and they're like, I don't know what just happened, but I feel connected to all. And so it's not necessarily that when we're speaking about divine intelligence and spirit, we're not talking about a certain God or a religion. It has nothing to do with that. It is the idea that we are all connected, that there is some sort of structure that holds us and guides us and loves us, and that we affect that structure with the words we use, with the thoughts we have. What also happens for me within all that, and this comes up so much these days, is the importance of neutrality, the importance of balance, right? I'm seeing all over, right? We've seen it for years now, these polarizations where we're either over here or we're over there. We believe this or we hate these guys, and so within that, I'm really noticing that importance of staying neutral, sovereign as well, right? Like still having my beliefs, or not that one just becomes passive. I'm not saying that, but finding within me where I'm feeling triggered at times, or where I'm being kind of hooked in and moved to one place. And so I find that by using sacred geometry as a meditative tool can be super supportive to create that balance, to create that container and sustainability for optimal well-being.
Charmaine, in your personal exploration of, because you're a therapist, you're a counselor, you're an art therapist, how has your own personal exploration of art, of therapy, and of helping people with psychedelic integration influenced your particular understanding of sacred geometry?
That's an interesting question. And what and there's so many parts to that there. So firstly, what comes to mind as far as sacred geometry and how that has kind of affected my life in ways. I'll use a personal example of as my grandma was dying. It was a really difficult time for me. And so I just began creating grids of the flower of life actually, I have it up here. I won't bring it down. It's a Metatron's cube. But I just kept creating grids and grids on large pieces of paper of the flower of life. And I noticed it really helped me work through some feelings. It really helped to bring pieces to the surface and create a healing. And from there, then I created Metatron's cube. And I've actually used this image I went over it and over it for maybe 2.5 years. Whenever I was feeling grief, I'd go over the lines again and again, and just creating that repetitive pattern. It felt really healing for me. I know in the courses I run, I've done a bunch of in-person courses. I have online courses for how to create the flower of life or Metatron's cube, but I know that in-person courses as well. What I hear from participants as they create, first we create the flower of life, and then I invite them to color it in. And there's so many options, right? You can color in so many different petals, but using that art therapy perspective, every petal has meaning, every color has meaning. And as people begin coloring in the flower of life, different thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories rise to the surface. And so as an art therapist, I work with the unconscious, right? And also working with psychedelics, we work with the unconscious in a way that we're developing a relationship for it, a safety, a container for that to come to the surface. And our unconscious, it takes care of us. It will never bring anything up that we can't handle or hold. And so, again, that's for me, that feels connected to all that there is, right? That connection to everything.
I feel like art in and of itself is, a lot of people report going into some sort of state of flow when they're creating art. And I feel like the, drawing or coloring is a meditative process in and of itself. And that meditative process sort of connects you to the divine. And, I see that connection in so many religious buildings, all over the world, these sacred geometry showing up all over the place, in places of worship and places with connection to the divine. And I wanted to speak to you about the concept of divine intelligence and how you feel it sort of manifests in the realm of art and sacred geometry in general.
Yes. It's interesting as you were saying that about flow states and that what happens when you're creating art in general. It brought to mind for me a book I had read called Stealing Fire, which is so fantastic and about moving into flow states. How when we're in a flow state, the same thing happens in our brain as when we're using psychedelics, right? The default mode network goes offline. So that's what's actually happening in the brain. It happens in meditation too. So for those that don't feel called to use psychedelics, absolutely, that's fine. These are not medicines for everybody, but we all have the ability to move into flow states. And when we're in that space, time stands still. And so that is an example of us spending time, of opening portals in ways, right? Because we're actually bending time and allowing whatever needs to come out, just as if we were in as a tool. The universe or all that is moving through us. And I'm going to get back to how that's connected to divine intelligence, but I wanted to show you something here. And there's a bit of a glare on this, but this is the vector equilibrium. So this image actually represents opening portals or 0 point energy or flow states. And so meditating on an image such as this can help one also move into those flow states. And coming back then to your question about, how is this all connected to divine intelligence, and recognizing that people for many, many, many years have been using the tools of sacred geometry to create buildings, and buildings that represent sacred spaces, right? That represent places where spirit can come through in a way that people feel more connected to. So absolutely, when we look at the structure of buildings, and we can look at different, groups that maybe created these places, but you have to question, like, where did they get that information? Does that just flow through us? Is that information always within us? Is that why when we are moving into altered states of consciousness, we begin seeing psychedelic patterns? What is it? I'm not sure why it is, but what I know in my heart, in my being, in my body, is that it is.
Charmaine, if we are sort of us as humans, if we are portals or openings or vessels, for messages to come through, can you speak more into how you believe we are geometric beings?
Absolutely, yeah. So our DNA is geometric. Our cells are geometric. If you look at what is called the egg of life, which is actually the seed of life, this image here, in three-dimensional form, what we get is what our cells look like in the first day or two after conception, right? We are geometric in every way. When we look at the double helix of our DNA, it is geometric. And so I would say there's a language to sacred geometry that's not using words, that's speaking to us at a cellular level, at a soul level. And that's often explored when people are looking at crop circles and trying to figure out, what does this mean? Like, and yeah, there's crop circles that are man-made, definitely. And that could be an art in itself, but there's crop circles that it's been proven that they are not man-made, right? There's light seen over top just before, they happen in seconds. When you look at the grain or the hay, they're bent, they're not broken. They've tested these vegetation and found out there's a radiation around where there's this burn mark in the bend of the hay or grain. And there's also, what they notice is that these areas grow at a much higher rate after a crop circle has been in it. So there's that whole piece. But if we look at it, if we're kind of looking at these crop circles in sacred geometry and wondering, like, what is a connection? What I've learned is that there is information being shared on a geometric level or on a cellular level. The same way when I look at sacred geometry or have it hanging in my home, I'm feeling an energy around it. There's information being shared, there's a language being spoken, and I don't need words to know what it is. I can feel it.
And how would this understanding that, understanding our own geometric nature, like you've just explained, right? How can, for someone who's sort of just starting out and hasn't necessarily understood their geometric nature, how can this contribute to their personal growth and their spiritual development?
I think for someone wanting to explore, who's not ever explored sacred geometry or would like to just connect to it in a way that has meaning, I would advise even just getting an image of sacred geometry or the flower of life and just putting it up in your room, somewhere you would see it often. Notice how you feel. Notice how that makes you feel just by looking at it every day. For those who are open to meditation, looking at these images with a softened gaze can be super powerful. I find with the images, like let's say, here, I'll bring this. So looking at this image, if you looked at it with a softened gaze, what would happen is different lines become brighter and then others will soften. So you continue to breathe, you continue to focus in on the sacred geometry. And what happens is it's almost like that message, the language is coming out and connecting to one's own geometric nature. And this, the representation of the Merkaba, is the energy center around us, right? The two intersecting pyramids on top of one another, spinning in opposite direction. This is a meditation tool in itself that many use, imagining themselves within a Merkaba. So that's one way. Another way I would totally recommend is trying it out. Try drawing the flower of life. There's some, I have a free video on YouTube if anyone's interested, where you can just go step by step on how to draw the flower of life. I'm sure there's many out there. And just noticing how that feels. And also releasing attachment to it being perfect. Because although there's balance, there's a perfection in ways, there's also perfection within imperfection. And so it's interesting when we create sacred geometry, and that's why I do all my work by hand, and not on a computer. There's something that happens when we're able to have acceptance for things that feel like they're not perfect, but in the end, still feel really beautiful.
Charmaine, your artwork is intriguing and fascinating, and I'm loving hearing the explanation around it and how it all evolves. And I'm curious to know, how do you hope that your artwork can help other people sort of foster and inspire them to sort of create that deeper connection between artwork on the one hand and like altered states of consciousness?
Yeah, well, I guess what I would say to that is, my hopes are that the work that I do is raising consciousness, is raising the vibration of our planet, right? The more people that are making sacred geometry art, the better. I feel like, because I do feel that this type of artwork shifts spaces in a way that raises a vibration. And maybe that doesn't make sense for a lot of people, but I'm sure everyone has been around someone that's in a bad mood and they walk in the room and everyone can feel it, right? That's vibration. And so the same way as when someone comes into the room and their energy just feels so wonderful, you want to be around it. That's vibration too. And so my experience is having sacred geometry in a space, in artwork, raises that vibration and supports that shift in consciousness that is happening, that's inevitable, that I believe is inevitable, right? As we influence one another, each circle is connected, each circle affects each other. So the same way as if I go to the grocery store and someone at the counter gives me a really nice smile and is friendly, that's going to make me feel good. But if someone's maybe completely unfriendly, it's going to be hard to not feel that and sense that. So that's definitely a way that I believe sacred geometry can support that. It's through meditation, I do believe. If people are using psychedelics too, if that is something that supports them on their healing journey, I believe that having anything in the space that is raising consciousness, raising the vibration, is helpful. And it doesn't need to be using psychedelics. It can be breath work, it can be sound healing, anything that is shifting us into a different state. And even states of consciousness can be broken down to just feeling better, right? So I do feel that it is supportive to have these images around, to just recognizing them in nature, looking at a tree and being like, wow, those leaves are so beautiful the way they're arranged. The branches are amazing the way it is, right? It just helps us to connect to everything around us, and to also recognize that we affect each other. And so in that, there's so much power.
And I think that also takes us into a whole other topic of discussion around like fractals and, how fractals show up in psychedelic journeys, but also fractals showing up in nature. Even the way a tree grows is almost a fractal in and of itself. Now, Charmaine, you are very passionate about sacred geometry. I hear it from your voice, and your artwork is amazing. And I know that you are so passionate about it that you've also developed a course around it. Could you speak to us a little bit about the course that you have around sacred geometry?
Yes, yeah. So I've created a course that walks people through creating the flower of life, Metatron's cube, and the platonic solids. So as you can see from this image here, we have the seed of life, and out from there is the flower of life, and then is Metatron's cube. The course itself walks people through sacred geometry in a way that invites and opens up a connection to the feeling, right? I'm also using an art therapy approach in ways. So we start by creating a point, discussing the importance of a point, moving out into 2 points, speaking about, what is connection, really staying with these experiences of creation, and then moving into the Vesica Pisces, speaking a little bit about, right, the 2 intersecting circles, speaking a little bit about what is this image? Where did it originate? What was it associated with in our world in the past? And then from there, moving out again into the seed of life, the egg of life, the sphere, and really exploring these pieces using meditation, using creation. Oftentimes I'll sprinkle in, I teach Kundalini yoga, so I'll sprinkle in some Kundalini yoga into that. And it's also a part of my psychedelic integration program. So within each module of that program, I also have a chapter on sacred geometry. And so it's interesting with sacred geometry. Well, that's my course, right? But there's also, when we're looking at sacred geometry and the chakras, right? And mandalas. And when we look at the ancient Vedic scripts, they speak of sacred geometry being a language that happens from the tones that they make. And when you look at cymatics, which is when they sprinkle sand over the metallic plate and then they play the vibration of a sound, we get the same images that are expressed and shown in the Vedic texts that represent each chakra. So I do have a whole series of artwork based on the chakras as well. And with those as well, I start with a grid of the flower of life, and then I create from there, really meditating myself on those different energy centers in the body as I create. So it's my intention that that healing that's coming forward is going to be shared with people who are looking and focusing on these images.
It's a fascinating topic, and I know we just sort of going over the surface of it and lightly touching it, but I feel like you have a really, really in-depth knowledge on the topic. Do you have books or recommendations of reading material for people who want to go into it a little bit deeper and explore things like the symbolism behind, the seed of life and the egg of life and the platonic solids and those types of things?
Absolutely. And I brought some of them with me here. I'll start with one of the books that really inspired me, which many people know, Drunvalo Melchizedek's work, and this is The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. So there's 3 volumes to this. This was definitely a Kickstarter for me to really dive into what is the flower of life. I have some other books here too, though, that I really enjoy and recommend. This is Robert Lawlor, Sacred Geometry, Philosophy and Practice. This is another really interesting one. And this one by Stephen Skinner, Deciphering the Code in Sacred Geometry. So there's so many books out there. Really, what's most important is what resonates for an individual. So recognizing that there is a divine intelligence within us that knows exactly what we need. And when we can tap into that knowing and trust that part of us, the same way that we trust that each circle connected to another circle affects one another, the right and perfect opportunities and support will come to us.
Thank you for all those great book recommendations. And question, for someone who prefers or who's a little bit more practical and prefers to do an exercise that could somehow start opening a creative portal, are there any exercises that you could recommend that they try and do?
You mean exercises like a video to follow or creating your own image? Yeah, I think I might have mentioned it earlier. I have a video on YouTube. It's free for people to watch on how to create the flower of life. Actually, I think I have two of them. One just goes through pictures and step by step. And then the other one's an actual video where I'm creating the flower of life with people. So yeah, I definitely recommend that if you wanted to go to my YouTube channel, which is Charmaine Husum.
Yeah, and we'll definitely put links for all of those and all your book recommendations and your course links and all of that in the comments below for sure. Charmaine, one last question to you before we wrap up. What is your overarching message to the world around creativity and in conjunction to personal growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my personal approach and belief is that creativity is integral in us being human. And that doesn't mean that one needs to be good at art, right? If we're going to create judgments around that, it's just about the process where people are allowed to express themselves using materials, using anything, earth, gardening, whatever feels creative for an individual, I find super important for personal growth. Obviously, as an art therapist, I expand that further where we use art in therapy. That's not about creating art. And so I really see on a daily basis the magic that can come from allowing the unconscious to come forward, right? Because that's what we're doing when we're tapping into creativity, we're tapping into imagination, and we are allowing for a different perspective and a different option for life, which I support completely. And I wish everybody optimal wellness. And I believe that sacred geometry and art can be a big part of that.
Yeah, and what a joy to live in a full state of self-expression. You know, like you were saying, doesn't matter which source it comes from, if it's gardening, if it's singing, if it's drawing, if it's spoken word, it doesn't matter, but to just find an outlet to fully express yourself is beautiful. And speaking of joyous ways of being, you know, this conversation has been a joy to me because, you know, I studied art for 4 years, one of the many things I've done, and I have a keen interest in psychedelics, and I've had an experience of sacred geometry myself many times, and I've found this conversation fascinating with you, and I just want to say I so appreciate you sharing your artwork, sharing your knowledge, and you know, you referred to vibrations that you get from people, you know, when you walk into a room, when you feel someone's sad, when you feel someone's happy. And I just always have this very joyous vibration from you. And it's always such a joy to spend time with you and have these conversations with you, Charmaine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, guys. It's such a pleasure to connect with you, and I really enjoy our conversations and our talks, and I celebrate you too for all that you're sharing with the world, right? The support, the love, the gifts and offerings that you give to the world every day. It is such an honor to know you and share this space. So thank you so much for listening and sharing. Yeah, so many blessings to you.
Thank you, Charmaine, and thank you so much to our audience and for those of you who've listened. And as always, if you've enjoyed the content, we would so appreciate it if you shared it, if you liked it, if you commented. Also, if you have questions for Charmaine around sacred geometry, please feel free to put them in the comments below. Please feel free to reach out for her. As you've seen, she's a wealth of information. She also sells her artwork. She has an incredible course around sacred geometry and developing all that creativity. And actually, we have had other interviews together, which I highly encourage you to watch her other videos, because as I said, she's a wealth of information. She has a video interview that we did together around what to do after your first ayahuasca ceremony and how to integrate it. And she has a fascinating interview if you're interested in shadow work in general and sort of doing a deeper exploration of inside. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charmaine. And we're looking forward to the next one. Take care.